Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for attending the Orchestra Networks SPS session. My name is Christophe Bariolade. I am CEO of the company. And joining me today is Conrad Chung, Senior Product Marketing at Orchestra Networks North America. So today, the topic of our presentation is reference data. So our objective is to explain you why reference data matters and why it is critical for the success of any master data management initiative. And to do that, we'll try a live demo exercise. So we thought it could be a bit refreshing after 2 days of presentation for you guys. But first of all, I will start with an introduction, try to explain, well, what is a reference data and why it's important for our customers. So when you think about master data management, probably the common definition you have in your mind is management of things and parties, or products and customers. This is true, this is very valid, and probably you did attend a lot of sessions around product information management or customer data integration. So yes, there's two big trees in our master data landscape. One is the things, the other one is the parties. But actually, there's a third family of master data that is becoming very important for our customers, and we can call that reference data. So reference data is all the set of shared information that is basically the glue between all your master data. So when you look at reference data, probably your first reaction will be, well, that's very simple. That's a list of countries, a list of currencies, so there's no difficulty of managing that. Actually, it's not true, because it's foundational, and the governance challenges on reference data are huge, because it's shared everywhere, across all your IT systems, all your business teams, and the ownership and responsibility around reference data is very complex. So before we start, I would like to give you 3 of our customers' examples and to show you why, for them, reference data management is very important. So the first one is a very well-known bank, Credit Suisse. They are using our solution for about a year, and as you know, Credit Suisse is a financial services organization with multiple activities like private banking, investment banking, asset management. For them, reference data is foundational because it's basically, it enables enterprise-wide coordination between those different activities. So what you see on this slide, and I'm sorry, but the definition is not great. They have a map of reference data, starting with what they call classification data, so all the codification like countries, currencies. Then they go to another level, which is called structural data. So all the hierarchies defining legal entities, chart of accounts, organization charts, and then master data, like counterparties, clients, and products. And for them, they have to go bottom up, because if you don't solve the management of the foundation, classification and structural data, it's very difficult then to manage the big master data objects. Another example is Michelin. Michelin, by the way, we are very proud that Michelin won 2 months ago the Gartner MDM Excellence Award in Europe. Michelin, as you know, is a very large manufacturing company, and for them, reference data management is key across the whole value chain of Michelin. So from purchasing to sales, as you can see, their value chain is touching products, is touching customers, but reference data is foundational across the whole value chain. So they need to have common definition of geocodes, of material, of cost centers to make it work as a full value chain. And the last one, perhaps it's not as well known as Michelin and Credit Suisse, but Technip is an 8 billion euro oil and gas engineering and construction company. So basically, their business is to build 3 billion euro offshore platform for oil and or gas. So their business is all about project management. And as you can see on these graphics, this is an example of an offshore field called Jubilee in Ghana. And you can see that for them, a project involves a lot of different organizations, engineering, manufacturing, construction, a lot of functions, a lot of assets, like a fleet of vessels. And so it's a very complex master data object. So for Technip, we did draw what we call an MDM domain map to show you all the master and reference data they have to manage. So basically, it starts with some business goals, such as simplifying the tracking of a project over time, reducing the time for onboarding suppliers, or improving the spend management, because as you can imagine, there are few customers, but they have a lot of suppliers. So then we show which business functions at Technip are involved in this initiative. And actually, reference data management goes across all business functions. So the operational people at engineering, manufacturing, but also the corporate functions such as finance, HR, risk, etc. And then you can see their master data map. So we don't talk here about product and customers, but we talk about projects, suppliers, regions, safety regulations, organization unit, etc. So this is reference data, and for Technip, it's a must-have. So having said that, the vision we have at Orchestra Networks is that any MDM program must, well, address the full landscape of your reference and master data. So do not treat it as siloed, like I have my product here, I have my customer here, but have something consistent or holistic for your data. So the way we see it is basically classifying data in three blocks. The first one is reference data. So this is foundational, and this is where you define your geographies and locations, your organizational structures, financial hierarchies, or any codification you have, public or private. And then we have things, so mainly your products, your services, your projects, and your assets, so physical assets, real estate, etc. And finally, we have the parties, so people, employees, clients, partners, suppliers, etc. But actually, we think that there is a fourth family of master data, which is the relationships between those different domains. I mean, it's totally useless to manage those three blocks individually, because you need to govern the relationships between the domains. Let's take an example. When Technip manages a project master data and link it to locations, the link itself is a master data because you need to manage it, so it will change over time. It will have some very specific rules to govern the relationship between a project and a location. So relationship is like a fourth family of master data. And so to make it consistent, you need to address everything in one go. You cannot deploy silos of solutions and of master data to manage it. So before we go to the demo with Conrad, I would like to jump in 5 minutes of solution presentation. So I will go very quickly, but just to highlight the main capabilities of our solution so you can understand a bit more the demo we have for you today. So, sorry, our solution is called EBX5, so that's a multi-domain MDM platform, and that's a model-driven solution. So basically what you model is what you get. So you can design your own master data model and then automatically generate the governance capabilities. So it starts with data modeling, so the ability to define rich data models, including objects, attributes, relationships, and metadata. So that's what we call semantic modeling, because you can model the reality. Second point is integrated data quality, so the ability to embed validation controls, integrity controls, and quality checks or matching rules inside the model. So it means that quality will be enforced at the point of entry when data is updated. So the third one is authoring, so the ability to provide end users, including business users, with a very simple browser-based user interface for viewing, searching, and authoring data. This includes a hierarchy management capability, and you will see that in Conrad's demos, the ability to view and manipulate your reference data as hierarchies. This also includes a collaborative workflow engine. So you have a workflow that enables business users to collaborate. So this is a data governance component where you can have step-by-step processes for creating, updating, approving master data changes over time. And then we have some more technical capabilities, so security and permissions, so the ability to define permissions for any user groups down to the field and record level. We also have version control. Let me stop for just a minute on version control. This is probably the most complex issue you have on reference data. Because when you manage, let's say, a customer hub containing 10 million of customers, you need to manage your current customers, but you don't care of your future customers. Well, actually, if you know how to manage your future customers, tell me because I'm interested. But when you manage, let's say, a legal entity hierarchy, you need to manage the current one, you need to keep track of the past, and you also need to work in the future because, let's say, you are going to reorganize the company. So version control is critical, the ability to work in past, present, and future at the same time. And finally, some integration and distribution capabilities, because for sure, this MDM hub needs to be integrated with your information system, so consolidating data and distributing data across many applications. So that's it. I told you I was very short on the product part. So that's what we do at Orchestra Networks, and now we would like to show you the solution in a real live example. So we discussed with Conrad and decided to select a topic. So everybody understands the airline industry. So we are going to be an aircraft, a new aircraft manufacturer coming to the market, and we'll show you how we can model, manage, and govern all our reference and master data as an aircraft manufacturer. So I will now hand over to Conrad to start the demo and see the solution live on this example.
Thank you, Christophe. Let me see if I can find my... Oh. It's actually there. Okay, so here we are. This is EBX. And as Christophe mentioned, we're talking about an aircraft manufacturer, so a competitor to Boeing, competitor to Airbus. And when you think about that aircraft manufacturer, like what do they have to worry about in their reference data? What do they have to worry about in their master data? So it's both product, it's both customers, and it's also things like reference data. And some of the categories of reference data that we'd be interested in, what are some of those things? Things such as currencies and countries. So why would we care about currencies and countries? Well, it's international business. A lot of countries have flag carriers, such as KLM or Air France. And then the currencies are important because when you think about siting those manufacturing facilities or maybe siting those repair and re-equipping facilities, you have to worry about foreign exchange exposure. So we have to worry about countries and currencies. And as Christophe mentioned, that you have both things such as entity values, the name of the country, but also relationships. So people commonly look at this data and they might look at something like this, an Excel spreadsheet, and say, currencies, countries, very simple, right? It's a one-to-one relationship. It's really not that hard. Well, is it really? Because if you look at those relationships between the countries and the currencies, what do we actually see? Well, what we see is that if you look at something like the European Union, which is a special case, you have both a political organization in which you have multiple countries that have come together to share tariffs, to share regulations, but then you also have a currency union. So you have countries down here such as France and Germany, Portugal, they're all Eurozone countries. They use the same currency, but at the same time, the European Union itself also has countries such as Poland and Great Britain that have their own currencies. They didn't take on the actual currency. So when you start thinking about currencies, start thinking about countries, this is some of that foundational data, and it's really not as easy as you'd think. But this isn't what an aircraft manufacturer is only interested in. What else do they care about? Well, they care about things like airports. So if you look at something such as, let's go into the actual MDM hub here, and look in at something like world airports, well, what do we care about? Well, we care about the various airports of the world because this is where our customers who fly this aircraft are going to fly between. And if we open up one of these airports, let's go over here to Henderson, what do we see? Well, we see that not only do you have information about the airport, you also have these relationships between the airport and the physical location. So I can traverse backwards and look at something like, where is North Carolina? Well, North Carolina is actually a location inside the United States. So the point we're trying to make here is that you have your primary reference data, things like geocodes, locations, ISO 3166 codes, and that itself is built on top of. You build on top of that things such as airports, because airports is a more complex form of reference data. And again, as we said, you can use information about these relationships to generate hierarchies. So if I'm curious about not just looking at this flat, wonderful Excel-like list of airports, if I want to understand, say, where are all these airports by country or country group, I can go ahead and use those relationships that I had in my countries table to now break up all these airports by location. So I can see what airports exist in the UAE, and if I scroll down and look at something like the EU, I think I went by it. Go by the EU, I can see all the various EU countries and then the airports within those EU countries. So what we're talking about here again is the need to maintain consistent, accurate values for the airports, for the countries, and then also the relationships that we have between those forms of reference data. Now, this is not just the reference data talk. We're also talking about integrating the reference data with our products and customers. So what are some of the products that we might sell, or what are the customers? Who are these customers that we have? Well, they're obviously airlines, so we can move in and look at airlines. And as we mentioned before, we can use both internal references. So if I'm looking at these airlines, again, I can use something, say, like affiliations with a global alliance to view my airline or airline customers in a different way. So if I have some kind of affiliate program where I'm providing, say, a preferred treatment for SkyTeam members, I might have this kind of view where I want to look at that information from more of a marketing perspective. I also want to talk about aircraft. And again, with aircraft, I have your basic flat tabular view, but we can use relationships about each aircraft, so things such as manufacturer and family, to take a look at that information so I can say, here we have all the different aircraft that I have, here are all the aircraft that my competitors are also flying on my customers, because I want to understand what my competitors are doing. And then I could go into something like the A320 family and then actually look at aircraft. So at this point, what we're really looking at is we're looking at the data as if it were a silo. So we're looking at customers, aircraft, and their products. And did you have a question, Christophe?
Well, just a question. Actually, what you show is that it looks like those different domains are like isolated. Does that mean that you can manage different responsibilities and ownership for each domain?
Yes, that's what it means. And so if you look here, we did isolate the aircraft MDM from the reference data. And the reason we did that is because, and unfortunately, I've got to bring up a PowerPoint slide. When we look at the governance problem, we always think there's going to be a separate, responsible, and accountable set of individuals for that domain. So you might have a team of individuals that deal with the reference data, and then a team of individuals that deal with just the aircraft or airports. Now, the relationships, when I tie the airports to the reference data, when I say DFW is in Texas, and Texas is actually in the United States, that's actually a layer of people that sits between those two responsibility and accountability lines. And that's actually where we think orchestration lives, where workflow lives. So it's important to consider that, to say, when I'm looking at my master data, when looking at my master data program, not only do I have to understand who is responsible for what, I also have to think about who is responsible for the transit lines, or those routes, or those connection points between those two different domains of relationships.
Yes, but I understand you are isolating data, roles, and responsibility, but one of the big challenges of MDM is the ability to enforce, let's say, cross-domain relationships, because if you treat your reference data in a silo and your aircraft in another silo, what's the point?
Exactly. And that's where we use the references. So in our case, when you see on the screen here a reference between... Pardon?
Go full screen.
Oh, go full screen. Good point. When you see a relationship, this aircraft here, this aircraft itself, actually let me go back to aircraft and pull up an actual carrier. So let's look at US Airways. So when we look at this aircraft here, we see that this particular tail number is registered to US Airways. And within EBX, what we can do is walk between the domains using those relationships. So I'm sure a lot of you attended Ted Friedman's talk, and he talked about semantic control. Well, semantic control can be resolved some kind of heuristics, some special AI software on the side. Or what you could do is just simply relate the two domains using some kind of relationship. So in this case, what did we do? We said we have an aircraft, we have an airline. Let's make the aircraft connected to the airline. And now we're using this connection to walk between our products and our customers. So I'm looking at how the aircraft relates to the airline. And then because airlines fly routes between various airports, I can also look at what airports are being serviced by US Airways. Now, this is all fine and good if we're looking at one particular airline, and you would think, well, can I use these relationships to build a hierarchy so I can understand how all these airlines or aircraft fit across the airports airlines combination? And the answer is, of course you can, because it's our demo. So we're going to go ahead and view that. And if you take a look at what you're seeing here, let me move this. What we're seeing here is we're seeing the countries, we're seeing the airports, and then we're seeing the airline that services that airport and the aircraft. So what have we done? What we've done is we've used the siloed bits of information, my products, my customers. We've used reference data, my airports, my countries. And then we've used the relationships. How do airlines relate to airports? How do aircraft relate to airlines? And then we said, how do airports relate to countries? And we've used all those connections to paint a picture of the entire environment so we can understand how these things are categorized and fit together.
Can you go back to the airline hierarchy? Because I noticed that you have some strange relationships, like under Air France, I can see another airline attached.
So you're saying Air France, right? Yes, that's actually a really good question.
Thank you.
So Air France and KLM, right? So it's my understanding that KLM was acquired by Air France several years ago. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah, and so the one thing about KLM is a flag carrier. I guess is it Dutch? Is that right?
It is.
Yeah, so what Air France KLM, or I guess Air France, decided to do is they decided to preserve KLM as its own carrier, its own brand. And so because we want to understand the contracts that our aircraft customers or airline partners have, we want to preserve those as two separate entities, but then we want to illustrate the fact that KLM is part of Air France. So that's why we have this hierarchy. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so as we are managing our customers, those airlines, I propose to do a live exercise with you. We know that in the coming months, American Airlines and US Airways are going to merge. So actually, we need to analyze the impact of that on our customer MDM, because we need to have some accurate master data on our customers. And I can imagine that it will have a lot of impact on the branding and the attachment of all the fleet of aircraft to this new airline. So basically, how can we treat this customer merger in our MDM?
So we have this complicated problem, which is that currently the merger has been announced, it's been approved, I guess it's been approved, but we're not quite sure what the complexion of the merger is going to look like. So what I propose we do is we actually create two different hypothetical future states. And actually, I called it phase 1 and phase 2 because this is actually what I think is going to happen. So I think in phase 1, what we should demonstrate is we should move US Air under American to create that hierarchy just like Air France KLM, because that's probably what's going to happen for the first, maybe year, 18 months. Mergers take a long time, pretty complicated. And then phase 2 is when basically American takes over all the contracts they have with us. So rather than having contracts assigned to US Air for the aircraft, we're going to retitle all the airplanes. Is that
okay, so can you explain a bit more what you mean by those future version and how it works? Because I think it's an important concept to show we can work in present and future data at the same time.
Yeah, so to go back to the PowerPoint, this is the view that we have, and each one of these instances we think of as, we call it data space. And so the data spaces are isolated. So prior to this, when we talked about the isolation of the domains, but the connectivity between them, but the isolation of the domains between reference data and then the airport MDM, we were talking about data spaces. And in this case, what we have is data spaces, but isolation by time. So I can have a prior as-of version, so the world before the American-US Air merger, the world currently, when we're in this weird state between US Air and American not quite merged yet, a world in which we think that US Air is going to become part of American as a child entity, maybe as a subsidiary, and then the final ultimate goal, which is US Airways disappears and then everything gets retitled. So what the data spaces allow us to do is allows us to model different scenarios of the future and deal with also maybe future dated, effective dated changes. So things have been improved. Is that
okay? Let's see how it works.
So let's try this out. See if it works. So in this case, what I've done is I've created the US American Airlines merger. And what we have here is I need to go find US Airways. And so US Airways is here under Star Alliance. And I'm going to move that node over here under One World. So American Airlines. So now, once this has been moved, then when I start viewing all the aircraft by airlines, I should see all the aircraft under American US Air, but as one entity rather than as two separate entities.
Wait a minute. I can see that US Airways is a member, is member of the Star Alliance, and American is member of One World. So what is going to happen? And if they take some decision, how are we going to manage that in the hierarchy?
So that's actually a really good question. Well, first off, if I actually knew what was going to happen to my US Airway miles, I don't know yet. But you've got a good point. The problem we have here is that US Airways is now a child of American, and American is part of One World. But when I look at the actual US Airway record, what I see here is that we've coded it as Star Alliance. Now, one thing that we do work on within EBX, we work on this concept of inheritance. And with inheritance, children can inherit values from their parent. So if I turn this on, this little button here, which means inherit from the parent, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, because US Airways is now a child of American Airlines, we should inherit the alliance that American Airlines is from. So because it is One World, then US Airways is now part of One World, only if I turn inheritance on. But now let's say that for this intervening period, for phase one of the merger, American says, we want to hoover up, we want to make sure we don't make those US Airway long-term customers really angry. So what we're going to do is we're going to allow, which is going to be really odd, we're going to allow US Airways to actually be part of Star Alliance. Well, then that's one possibility. Now, something else that's a possibility which we didn't model for, but we could always change the model and do this, is, it's more than likely in phase one of the merger that maybe American is actually going to allow US Airway customers to produce and consume both One World and Star Alliance miles. But we don't have to really model that right now.
Great. So what we've seen so far, I think, two important concepts, in our technology, but also in the way you need to manage your data. One is time, and time is very important for reference data because you really need to navigate between present, past, and future. So here we are working in the future, the future state of this American-US Airways merger. But you can also do the same in the past. For regulation purpose or reporting purpose, you need to roll back at any point of time or even compare to point of time what has really changed in my master data. The second concept is the relationships and those type of inheritance rules, which are very sophisticated because you can across a hierarchy, decide that some fields and some attributes are inherited down to each node of your hierarchy. So I hope this example we are showing today, it's easy for you to project yourself in your own data because I'm guessing there's not a lot of aircraft manufacturer in the room. But clearly it's a real-life use case we see in any industry.
So now let's look at phase two. So in the phase two of the merger, what we're talking about was talking about all the US Airlines aircraft, US Airways aircraft being absorbed into or re-entitled for American. Now, in this case, I don't have the rights to do this. So what we've done is we've actually set up a workflow. So I'm going to take a look at the workflows that are open out there. And what do I see? Well, I actually see that there is an active workflow. So in this case, let's actually take a look at that. Okay. So the aircraft ownership has been updated, and we're actually at approved title changes. So this is an example of what we're talking about collaboration. What we have here is, like we said before, aircraft, that's things. You've got airlines, those are customers, those are parties. And in this case, we have a workflow in which individuals from the maybe aircraft financing team are working with individuals on the customer care team to go ahead and retitle all of those treaties or contracts that we have open. So in this case, we've had an individual, they've already done the change, and we're going to take a look at the Delta view and also look at the approvals. So who has this? It's Nick Fury. Yes, the Avengers as part of their part-time jobs actually work for a fake airline. Okay, let's see. So here's Nick. And we're going to go into the data workflows. And we'll open this approved title change. And let me change the view. So what do we see here? What we're seeing here is we're seeing the after effects of the change that had been made. So we can drill into the aircraft. And let's actually look at one of these tail numbers here. And well, what do we see? Well, we see here, let me expand this. What we see here is we see the original values here, which is that this particular tail number, that would be N626AW, that particular tail number used to be registered in American US Airways, but now the proposed value is American Airlines. And this is part of that curation process. This is part of that master data management mastering process. This individual would then go ahead and approve all these changes, and as they finished, would then push this information, make it live as part of our phase 2 merger. And then at some point in the future, when we finally figure out what actually happens between the US Airways and American merger, we can either take 1, which is the US Airways as a child of American, or we can take 2, which is that US Airways goes away in totality, and all of those products that they own have now become part of American. So it gives us some options and a way to model different impacts on our business without actually having to change any of the master data. We're using the foundational information to look at the future or make estimates about what might happen.
So let me comment just a little bit on that. What you've just seen is a workflow where basically business users are receiving email notifications and reviewing their inbox and doing tasks. And this is very important because, again, when we talk about, let's say, a customer MDM, there's not a lot of authoring by business user because customer is creating a CRM system, you match, dedupe, and that's it. But for reference data, it's a slow changing dimension and it requires a lot of collaboration between a lot of business teams. And actually, it's very difficult to say who owns the aircraft object. Everybody owns it at our company. So the idea of having this type of workflow, collaborative workflow features is that end users will be able to touch, to manage data changes by themselves and get approvals. And this has a big benefit for your organization, which is basically killing all those spreadsheets. Because, frankly, everybody knows that reference data are managed in spreadsheets, and that's a nightmare because there's no governance, no security, no quality. So the idea of moving the business users to a UI which is simple but very secure is a big benefit for managing those data changes through a workflow.
One comment about the spreadsheets is that when we think about a lot of our customers and we ask them, what's the actual cost of bad reference data? What they tell us is that they do the analysis and they look, what do those spreadsheets cause? Those spreadsheets cause reconciliation issues later. So let's go back to the beginning. At the very beginning, we were looking at country data. Country upon country, we built airport. And then with airport information, we connected both airlines and aircraft. Now, if the country data is bad, that bad country data then ripples up through airports and then into the network of information that we have. So if you think about this as a network graph, the most central nodes, if it's bad there, everything else goes bad over time. So our concept has always been, if you remove the spreadsheet problem, what will happen is that you should reduce the overall amount of reconciliation that happens inside your firm. Now, we do have some evidence for this, and the evidence came from Credit Suisse. And what they told us is that within their back office, prior to the implementation of our product, they had somewhere in the order of like 2,000, 3,000 individuals whose sole responsibility was dealing with reconciliation issues of all kinds. Now, I'm sure a lot of people in this room here probably have a similar issue, which is a lot of reconciliation going on, and the reconciliation is happening because the spreadsheet that the person from finance was supposed to send out at the beginning of the month got sent to the wrong people and they didn't get it, and so everyone's using the wrong cost center codes. And this is one of the issues that we try and resolve. Make it clean, have this platform here which keeps the data accurate and consistent, and then if individuals want, they can always export copies of this information into Excel for their own personal use. So if they do have spreadsheets and models that they want to use, they can always come to this system to pull it out. Because we want to make this a pragmatic system, not some type of system that everyone must use and always must use. We want to make it flexible so the data can be distributed and used throughout your organization.
So the last scenario we would like to show is how you need to deal with changes not only inside your master and reference data, but also in the definition, I mean the models. So a good example, I think, is in our scenario that we are going to launch a new aircraft to compete with the Airbus A380. And for that, we know that all the airports will need to upgrade for this high-capacity aircraft. So to do that, Conrad, you need to actually change the data model to add those new attributes and new characteristics and be able to then upgrade our airport information.
And of course, I was anticipating this. So what I've already done is I've already gone ahead and created a new group called High Capacity Upgrades. And I've included information about the various kinds of upgrades that the airport would have to undertake in order to accommodate this new high-capacity aircraft. And by simply publishing this model, what it's going to do is walk me through a series of steps here to deal with version control on the model itself. It will inform me what's going to change. And then when I publish, and I can save snapshots if I want to roll back, when I publish, if I go ahead and I take a look at the airports, what emerges? What emerges is we have now a new group called High Capacity Upgrades, and it shows me a couple of things about, I guess effective date is Boolean. I made that mistake there. But it shows me a bunch of these new attributes that are on the aircraft record that I can go ahead and add. So if I go ahead and find our favorite airport, which would be DFW. Let's find that. I can go ahead and make a modification here and say, yes, the runways have been upgraded and the public safety bits have been upgraded, and I'll fix the dates in a minute.
So what you've just seen is that Conrad was actually changing the underlying model of the MDM. So as it is a model-driven solution, you can do that in this web UI. And let's say, okay, we have this new high-capacity upgrade group, but something is missing, like we need also airports to upgrade the jetways. So can you do a real change, not something prepared in advance, to see how you can deal with this data model update and see the impact on our MDM?
Yes, we can. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new Boolean field here for the jetway upgrades. And what we're showing you here is an example of business IT collaboration. So our concept has always been, let's try and make this tool accessible for business people and also the IT individuals that support them. And by working iteratively between the business and IT, by getting advice from the business, and then making model changes on the fly. So he wants jetway upgrades? Okay, well, let's put jetway upgrades in here. And let's go ahead and publish this model. It's going to inform me that I've removed effective date but added jetways. And let's publish. And then we'll take a look at the world airports, and what do we see? Well, if we go back to DFW, doesn't have to be DFW, but we should see that new field that I just added as part of the high capacity upgrade. So now I see that the jetway upgrades are here, so I can go ahead and make that change. The concept that we've had around this tool is always that the individuals that know this information the best probably don't reside in your IT organization. They probably reside somewhere in the business. And by building a tool, by using model generation, by allowing it to take in information as you work with the business, you can further guide and shape and document what the real master data environment looks like, what the real relationships look like between these different master data domains.
So actually, when we look at how our customers are implementing the MDM, well, first, most of them ask us, where shall we start? How shall we start the initiative? So it's clear that starting with the foundation and reference data is great because it's foundational. It's probably simple to address in terms of data modeling, and you can go step by step. So the way our customers are implementing the solution is really almost an agile implementation approach. So they don't launch big multi-year MDM programs with big waterfall projects. They do step-by-step incremental projects. They involve the business users in rapid prototyping workshops so they can almost build the MDM as they work because they can see the result in the UI. So it's very dynamic and very incremental. And then once you have the first, let's say, domain under control of the MDM, you get user adoption. Some of them are using the user interface, some are not, but you get user adoption, and then you can grow from there. So, I mean, you can add new domain, new model, new attributes, and cover progressively your master data landscape. Going back to my 3 customers example at the beginning, I think Technip is a great one, and they are a Gartner case study from, I think, 2 years ago. They started their MDM program on finance. So the CFO wanted to have a better reporting and a 360 view on the financial hierarchy. Very simple business case. But after the first project, which was delivered in around 3 months, so very quick, they decided to grow. So now after 3 or 4 years, they are managing 16 master data family, covering projects, suppliers, HR, risk, and more. So it's a very good example of a step-by-step approach where you can go very far, but start very small your MDM initiative. And it's very secure because you can get user adoption step by step, so you don't have to wait for having a result in 3 years and people saying, well, we don't want that. So it's a very pragmatic approach of deploying the MDM.
If there's anything that we'd like you to take away from this particular talk, it's not just you should buy our software, which of course is something we hope you do, but it's really to think about this problem, is to really go back to here. It's really to think about the fact that master data management is not just about the values and value consistency, but it's about the relationships between the different domains. And then as you're thinking about those values, as you're thinking about those relationships, think about who's responsible and accountable for those changes and maintaining that consistency. Because when we look at master data management projects out there, it's like 80% political. Technology is a big component of it, true. Technology can make your life easier, true. However, if you don't resolve the political problems, then the master data management project will never achieve any success. And I think with that...
So I think we covered most of our demo scenario for today, so we have time to take questions.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Actually, do we have a mic? Just shout it out. I'll repeat the question. Should I talk about the architecture? Or do you want to talk about the architecture?
Well, first, the technology itself is very standard. So it's Java software. That's part of your question. Java, relying on RDBMS storage, and nothing on the client side because it's fully browser-based. Now, in terms of deployment architecture, so first, the solution supports 2 different patterns of integration. One is the consolidation style of MDM, where you keep the point of entry in your existing systems, but you want to consolidate, validate, enrich, and resync. And the other one is a more centralized authoring approach, where you are using the UI and the workflow to create and update your data centrally and then push, basically, the updates to your application. Actually, in real life, you're using both. It depends on your data domain and your requirements. And then there are some advanced options we have, like a distributed architecture, because some of our customers, they want a centralized governance inside an MDM, but they want a physical distribution of the hub in, let's say, different geographies. So it's typical in banking, where you need the master data to physically sit in a country for legal reason. So we have a distributed architecture option where you can distribute physically the MDM, but keep all nodes in sync between territories.
And I think as part of that, the data does live in a country such as Germany, but then when it leaves the border, it can also be obfuscated. Because I think in certain cases, you need to disguise the information when it leaves when it goes transnational. So there's like problems such as that the distribution technology take care of. Workflow engine is built into the actual tool. So yeah, it is.
And the reason for that is that our workflow is dynamically mapped to your own master data models and your own governance policy. So it means that if you change the underlying data model or you change the underlying security definitions, the workflow will dynamically adapt to that. So clearly it's not an enterprise BPM tool. It is a workflow designed to deal with data management or data governance processes. So don't try to use it for other purposes. But it's very good to have a workflow which is embedded into the MDM. So I'm sorry, you want to show it?
I can show it.
Because everything you can do in the UI, you can also do it by invoking web services, which are dynamically generated from the model. So we can see a quick example of publishing a web service to, let's say, create, update, delete airports. Very easy.
Right. So let me go ahead and... So to answer your question, the way that we look at this is that when we talk about model-driven, what we mean is that all the interfaces, that's both the user interfaces as well as the system interfaces, are created. And not only can we generate the create, read, update, delete services for the underlying master data and also some logistic information such as doing record counts, we also provide you access to web services to kick off, launch, and get information about ongoing workflows. So when we think about it in the context of larger SOA strategy, what we believe is that most firms will have their multi-million-dollar BPM platform, and that's going to do the long-running processes. But at some point, that BPM workflow, as it gets to maybe a customer insertion, will need to step into something like an MDM tool. And the question is, do you spend the time, money, and effort and the laborious, kind of painful challenge of integrating that BPM architecture into some other MDM that doesn't even have workflow? Or our approach is integrate that BPM to the front end of our web services so that the authoring, the stewardship, the quality happens in the context of the master data management tool as a microflow. And then when we're done, it pushes information back out to the BPM process, and the BPM process continues. So what we tried to do is we tried to consider every aspect of the data governance and the data management process inside EBX to make sure that we had the features and functions that would knit into all the other products that are out there. So yes, we do data quality, but then for certain specific kinds of massive batch, match, merge, dedupe, we say use a data quality tool and just knit it into our system. You have BPM? Fine. You want a common inbox? That's great. You can knit that common inbox into our tool because that's where the master data management processes happen in the context of your process. So we tried to make it very flexible for that purpose. Does that answer your question? Okay.
I think we have another question
from
we do. This gentleman here.
No?
Yeah?
Go into some of the data quality features, components that you might have to reconcile the data acquisition aspects of reference data?
So data quality, it's a very wide topic. So we have, I would say, two main capabilities in the solution for that. One is the definition of all the validation controls and the integrity controls you want to enforce when the data is changed by a user or by a system. So simple rules like maximum length of a field, complex rules like business rules between multiple fields to check controls. And EBX performs that in real time at the point of entry and generates error reports for end users so they can interactively correct the data. Then there's another topic covered by EBX, which is matching. So this is pretty new. This is a capability we've introduced recently, well, actually a new version recently, which is a full-featured matching engine, which is integrated in the MDM. So with this matching engine, I'm not sure we have time to do a full demo, but we can see you just after. You can define matching policies on your data. So on multiple attributes, you can use a library of algorithm. You can configure the different weights of your attributes to perform matching. And then the engine will provide survivorship, so automatic resolution of duplicates, or stewardship, so a dedicated UI inside this one, where data stewards can review the suspects, the clusters of duplicates. They can take decision on merging records or splitting records. And this matching engine provides advanced capability like the one I like very much is called false negative detection. So we match, and we don't detect a duplicate. So it's like the Gillette razor, you know. We rematch a second time with a different matching policy to be sure it's not a duplicate. So those type of capabilities. And again, the philosophy of the tool is that everything is available in one box. So the matching engine is totally integrated into the MDM. So you can do matching in real time or in batch mode in the MDM. Any other question?
Oh.
So we have here and here.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. A question about maintaining relationships between these entities, right? So you showcased how you maintain relationships between different reference data entities within this utility tool, which is really great. But now, as you load data into your data marts or some sort of repositories of which you report, is there a way to enforce these relationships over there as well or downstream? Because you could get out of sync, right, depending how you load. This could be one book of records, but then when they load into data marts, fact tables and so forth, it could be different, right?
So let me see if I understand the question. So one of the things that we have seen is that we have seen, say, firms with multiple, maybe I should just bring it up. We've kind of seen this problem, which is we see firms with multiple systems of record, systems of reference, and then the question is that I'm keeping copies of either the reference data or the party data in these different pots. And then when you come out to EBX, the idea is manage all that information in one place centrally and then distribute. So are you asking on the distribution of the information, can we enforce what changes to come back or round tripping? Oh.
That's actually the question. So when they're loading data into their facts, right, and these codes come from whatever transactional systems,
right,
that information can be different, right, because these intersections of those codes provide you hierarchies, which you have already established and you manage in this world. But how do you make sure it's aligned with your transaction data, with your real data, right?
Right. And I think that's actually where a lot of the integration capabilities that we have come into play. So one of our larger customers in Europe is a company called Faurecia, and they manufacture auto parts for Audi, BMW, VW, those types of things. And they have multiple systems of record. They have multiple SAP implementations, actually. And all of the attributes and information about the products is reserved or maintained and managed inside EBX and then published through web services into their SAP instances. So what it allows them to do is allows them to have finer-grained control over both the entities and the relationships in EBX, whilst not sacrificing any of the problems inside I guess not sacrificing, I should say, but not discarding the usable parts or the good parts of SAP, which is really transactional processing. I mean, do you have any comments on that? I mean, did that?
No, another answer to your question is the ability also to enforce integrity, not between data that are inside the MDM, but also with external sources. So we have a lot of customers connecting EBX to sources like Dun and Bradstreet or stuff like that. So EBX has the capacity to map an external service call to a validation control to perform validation with an external source. That can be useful in some cases.
Great, thank you. That answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think we have a question here, Miss. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for for the presentation. In my particular implementation, I support a reference data master that it's managed by Golden Source. It's a counterparty, entities, organization, security master. And how would an implementation with this, if they, for example, a country code changes, so then all the domiciles that are related to these companies that are domiciled in a certain country code, all that has to propagate. How would this do that efficiently, or is there a way to manage that centrally?
So are you saying that the country security master counterpart information is being managed separately today, or is it managed all in the same environment?
It's all in the same Golden Source platform.
I think it's something we can actually talk. It's a counterparty. Counterparty management in financial services, especially if you're dealing on the institutional side, has actually gotten really quite complicated. There actually is a gentleman here who is working on that in the back, and you could talk to him about that specifically. But I think within our tool, the way that we deal with those evolutions is that we do use this data space concept. So we are managing at the container level. So the concept would be, if you're having a future change, let's take an example such as you have exposure to counterparties that are in Sudan, right? And Sudan actually separated in two countries, North Sudan and South Sudan. And now you want to understand, like, what happened to these counterparties? Where's South Sudan? Well, we deal with that using the data spaces where you would model that change in the future. You would then indicate within the particular model the ones that are affected by that, and then go forward from there, because you may see a separation. Now, I think it actually gets more granular than that, because it would also depend on the counterparty information that you have. So if the counterparty information that you have is actually down to the ISO 3166-2 level, because usually the separation on country borders happens at that level, the subdivision level, then it would just naturally occur, because you would just change the hierarchy inside the country table to say these 3166-2 codes are now associated with South Sudan, and then all your counterparties get updated from there. So it's a simple hierarchy change. But what we often see is a scenario where, and this actually goes back to quality, we often see scenarios in which you just have country, so it's just the Sudan country code. And what it requires is a steward to go in and actually dissect whether or not this is a North Sudanese or a South Sudanese contract. And so oftentimes when I think people think about quality, they think about, oh, I can get a heuristic, I'm going to do something like a Levenstein match, and bang, my life is going to be good. But when you look at some of the more complex B2B data, the truth is that the quality tools only take you so far. At the end of the day, unfortunately or fortunately, it goes down to some person who understands the information, probably somebody in legal, somebody in finance, somebody in customer care, to sit down, review the information, take all the data they have about that particular entity or contract or counterparty, and then from there discern what to do with it, because there's not enough data. And so what we try and do is we try and connect the information to all the various sources so that you have as much information as possible to make an accurate decision or accurate choice.
Perhaps we have time for a last question before we close. Sir?
Can I use this tool to also do some sort of a risk analysis of what happens when certain attributes change, or if I add certain attributes, how does it impact my systems end to end?
So I think it's like impact analysis.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, in a sense that there's this concept of data space, which is like a staging or a draft version, is frequently used by our customers to do impact analysis. So as EBX is holding all the controls and relationships between data, you can use data space to say, well, what if? So what if I'm splitting this Sudan country into two countries? What will be the impact on my counterparties? And then once you've done your impact analysis, you can throw away this data space. It's like a draft. So within the MDM, the answer is yes. Now your question looks like you want to do that down to your information system, down to your applications. So the answer could be yes if you decide that inside your master data model, you not only design a model of your master data, but also a model of the, let's say, the cross-references with your system. So you can say, I have my airline ID, global, but then I am maintaining the cross-references of this airline ID with a value in each of my systems because I need to apply transcodification at integration time. So in this case, it means that the MDM knows not only the global master, but also the value in each system. So you can do impact analysis almost down to your different systems. And I think looking at the clock, this closes our session. So thank you very much for attending. And we don't have any more solution showcase, but the team will be outside the room, so we're happy to continue the discussion with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.